claims that if Harris wins the election, it was clear as day. And this is CNN setting it up just like that. So if they cheat and she wins, then it was clear as day, right? Nobody really knows where the election is going. But one thing I do know is Kamala Harris is not more popular than Donald Trump. It's just not a thing. Welcome back to Quality TV. I'm your host, Qua. And guess what I did today? You'll never believe it. I went and voted. I got on top of that old horse and I moseyed on down to that voting booth and I voted. I think everybody should try to get out there early, but I got out there today. Do I think there was any type of election interference or voting interference? No, it was a pretty straightforward, cut and dry process. I got in there, I signed my ballot, put it through the machines. I don't think there was anything that happened that was unusual, but that doesn't mean that there isn't anything that's out there happening unusually. I want to talk about some things that's been going around in the news, registration fraud and other things. News stations, they're putting it out there so that if Harris does win, then they say it was as clear as day. Do I agree with that? No, I don't. They say she's more popular than Trump. I don't agree with that either. But we're going to get into the video and we're going to talk about it. But before we get into the video, let me put my I voted sticker on so you guys can see that my vote counted. Yeah, I'm going to put it. Wait, let me put it on. No, I'm going to put it over here so you guys will see it. Look at that. It says I voted. I voted. My vote counted. Take that. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. The first clip we're going to talk about, it says that Trump ramps up election fraud allegations. My thing is, he wouldn't have to talk about these election fraud allegations. There wasn't actually things going on that show signs of election fraud interference.
Joining us now, NBC News senior enterprise reporter Brandy Zadrozny. So when you have that little element of truth to it, what you can do is then manipulate it and skew it in order to push your own false narrative about it. Have officials come back to us and told us anything more about this investigation?
Nope. They are looking into it. And a similar thing was happening in York County, maybe. York County officials said, we are also looking into some ballots, and that's where they stopped. As you know, disinformation loves a vacuum, and to swoop in and fill that vacuum with lots of falsehoods, right? We caught it. Who is we that he's talking about? It's not the Trump campaign. It's not Republican officials. It was the election workers, right? Reviewing the things as they should. The process, the boring process of democracy working as it should. But he's able to take that and spin it into this narrative.
Can you give us a little bit more insight into just the formal process or the normal routine process that these election workers are going through to make sure that these ballots go out to the right people?
So is a little truth not a truth? There are signs, and there's been signs even going back to 4 years ago that there were and is election interference. So what flames of fear that he's stroking, I'm not sure, because there is, in fact, there is cases of election interference, and it's been getting heavier and heavier as the election draws near, and they want to make it seem like that it's Trump stroking the fear of people. No, it's not true. He's not stroking the fear. He's actually speaking on the things that are happening. There are people trying to rig the election. I'm sure you've heard the term, make it too big to rig. But it's still being rigged at the end of the day. And most of these places where it's happening, that is in swing states. Pennsylvania is one of them. Everybody's fighting for Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is having tons of election interference.
Well, there's tons of processes, right? Like for example, there was another issue in Pennsylvania, which he also has sort of suggested is fraudulent or part of the cheating aspect, that claimed that people that had shown up in line yesterday to request mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania in Bucks County, they were told to leave before 5 o'clock, the cutoff time. But that cutoff time wasn't actually the cutoff. It's not like it was voting day, and there is no pre-voting in Pennsylvania. So basically they said, go away, we're not obligated to take that long. But then it became this huge thing, and they said, oh, we're filing a huge lawsuit, but it wasn't a huge lawsuit. It's these particularities of voting are boring and specific, and by the time we've gone through them and said, oh, here's what is happening in Lancaster County, he's on to the next thing.
Yeah, and part of the issue is that Republicans for decades have been saying that they want voter ID. They want voter ID to make sure that polling is safe and that it's honest and that only the people who should be voting are voting. Democrats and voting rights activists have argued that, hey, listen, you can do that, but what you're going to do is disenfranchise a whole number of people who aren't able to go to the DMV and get an ID, or who don't know about it. It's going to make it too difficult to exercise what is a constitutional right.
Right. Now, there have been sort of meta studies.
I don't understand what is the beef with people using their ID, their driver's license, their identification card to vote. How else are you going to prove that you're a citizen? You need an ID. You need a driver's license with almost everything you do in this country. So why is there an issue? Because they're making it where it's a requirement to vote is to have an ID. Everybody can get an ID if they're a citizen of the country.
Somewhere between like 1 in every 10 voters will be disenfranchised because of that. And it's no big surprise that that is usually younger voters on college campuses, voters of color, and voters that...
They're foreign exchange. They're foreign nationals. They're getting their education here, but they're not exactly citizens. In my opinion, I don't think they should be able to vote either because they're still not citizens of our country. But, I mean, that doesn't make sense, right? Does that make sense? I think that makes sense.
Maybe aren't as rich as...
Don't have the same means.
Yes.
All right, Brandon.
You don't have to be rich to get an ID. I'm not rich, and I've been getting IDs my whole life. What's your point?
Zadrozny, thank you so much for joining us. And joining us now, Stanford University professor of law and MSNBC election analyst Nate Persily. Thanks so much for joining us. Tell me about these claims, because this is what Donald Trump is saying as of last night. I would expect to hear him say a lot more things just like this as we get closer to Election Day, and then potentially on Election Day itself if it looks like he's losing.
Well, let me just echo something that Brandy said, which is that the system is working. This is exactly what should happen, which is that if there are problems in applications, that they will be rejected. That's not just happening.
It should happen, but it didn't happen last election. They went up and down saying that the claims were false, but there was, in fact, actual proof of election interference last election. But hey, I don't know. When they talk about Republicans X, Y, and Z about election fraud, but all Democrats, when they lose, it's fraudulent, right? When Hillary lost, Russia, right? It was Russia, and even till this day, there are signs of election fraud that's coming to the surface, and they're still blaming Russia. Russia's in the middle of a war right now. I mean, I guess the whole world is watching our elections, and for a good reason, but it still has to be fair at the end of the day, no matter what they say. Some truth is still truth. So he can say what he wants to because it is actually happening.
These counties in Pennsylvania, it's happening in many places around the country. And this is what the professional election officials do. And also, just to reiterate, if there are errors on the voter list, that doesn't mean that there's ballot fraud. If there are imaginary people who are on the list, it's not as if they're going to show up in the polling places. And so there's a very big difference between errors on, say, the voter registration rolls and whether there's actually ballots that are cast that are going to have an effect on the election. But what we're seeing in this pre-election period is a lot of dust being kicked up to preserve the possibility for contesting the election after the fact.
For anybody that might be wondering, if you're say you're filling out an application and the allegation here is that this one person filled out a number of applications because the handwriting on the applications was so similar, could you, in theory, fill out an application and get a ballot sent to one person at one address, or maybe at a handful of addresses that the person might have
So if there's a number of actual falsely registered voters, and then they're using the mail-in ballots, why is it impossible to believe that they're sending in false mail-in ballots? I mean, that makes sense to me. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense. But over to the next clip, and we're going to talk about the claims that if Harris wins the election, it was clear as day. And this is CNN setting it up just like that. So if they cheat and she wins, then it was clear as day, right? But nobody really knows where the election is going. But one thing I do know is Kamala Harris is not more popular than Donald Trump. It's just not a thing. She's wildly unpopular for a Democrat, and Trump is wildly more popular than her, and it's been going on. Trump's been in the trenches for almost a decade running for president. Most of America backs him, so I'm sure the Democrats are being flipped too. I'm still registered as a Democrat, and I voted for Trump today. So if it happened to me, I'm sure it's gonna happen to many, many, many Democrats, because the candidate that's up there now is not the best person for the job, and we all know it. But some people like to remain blind to it. But let's get over to that clip. It says, "Run the numbers. If Harris wins, the signs were clear as day." Do we actually believe that? Like, do we honestly believe that the signs are as clear as day that she's going to win? I don't.
Today, the case for Kamala Harris, the signs as clear as day. And the number one sign is that Harris, simply put, is more popular than Donald Trump. Her net favorable rating is higher than Trump. She's at -2. Trump's at -7. I went all the way back since 1956 and looked at the polls. Does the more popular candidate usually win? The answer is absolutely yes. 16 times the more popular candidate has won. Only one time the less popular candidate has won. I will note that was Donald Trump back in 2016. But of course, remember, Hillary Clinton was quite unpopular.
He won because he's more popular. Donald Trump is popular. That's one thing that you cannot take from him. He's popular and he's relatable to most Americans, to most guys. He is. Whether you like it or not, people like Trump for the way he talks. Some people don't like him for the way he talks. But she's not more popular than Trump, and we all know it.
Herself. But the bottom line is this: Kamala Harris has been consistently more popular in the polls than Donald Trump is. She's consistently had a higher net favorable rating than Donald Trump. And normally, usually, the candidate who's more popular goes on to win on election day.
Democrats are fond of that saying, forget the polls, when we vote, we win.
Yes.
And you see something in that.
Absolutely.
When they vote, they cheat, and then they win. But, you know.
Take a look at the special elections, right? Democrats in special elections, their performances the last 2 years. What has happened? We're looking at state legislative and federal special elections. On average, these Democrats have surpassed Joe Biden's 2020 margin by 2 points. By 2 points. And remember, Joe Biden won. So the fact that these Democrats have been doing better than Joe Biden's been doing is a good sign. Historically speaking, there is correlation between how folks do in the special elections, especially in this polarized era, and how folks do eventually in the presidential election. It was actually one of the warning signs last time around in 2020, where Democrats really weren't doing that great in special elections, despite the polls saying that Joe Biden was going to win rather easily. It suggested Trump would do better on election day. This time around, the special elections are suggesting the opposite, that in fact Joe Biden, because Democrats have been exceeding Joe Biden's margin, that maybe Democrats will actually do better than the polls have been indicating.
But what about the fact, two factors. Yeah. One, the right track, wrong track. Country, so few people think the country is going on the right track right now.
Yeah.
And also something you pointed out yesterday as a factor, which is Biden's bad approval rating.
Yeah. So yesterday I pointed out that very few people think the country is going on the right track. Very few people approve of Joe Biden's approval rating. You can see it right here. In 2024, it's just 28% who say the country's on the right track, 40% approve of Joe Biden's job. But remember, in 2022, these metrics look awfully similar. In fact, slightly less believe the country was on the right track, slightly more approved of Joe Biden's job, but very similar numbers here. And remember, Even though the top metrics were bad for Democrats in 2022, the White House party did historically well in that midterm. So the bottom line is, Kate, a lot of Democrats believe when voters vote, they win. And with abortion being a much bigger issue this time around than historically speaking when it was in 2022, Democrats did historically well. Perhaps Democrats.
Abortion is literally the only thing that is keeping Kamala Harris in the race. I'm conservative, right? I'm a conservative person. I like to think I'm still registered Democrat, but I'm still conservative. There's a lot of things that constituted in me switching to the red, but abortion, I'm neutral on that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm on board with whatever you want to do. Go ahead and do it. You're gonna do it anyway, so just go ahead and do it. It's not a big issue to me. I feel like there's bigger issues in the election right now, which is the economy, immigration, and then the number 3 issue is abortion, and that's what's keeping her in the race. And in my opinion, there's nothing else outside of that that's keeping her in the race, because she's failing on everything. She can't persuade or convince us that she's better for the economy, she's better for foreign relations, or she's better for immigration, because she messed it up, right? But I just wanted to show you the headlines that CNN they're putting out there. So in case she does win, if they cheat and she wins, then it was clear as day, right? But let me go over to this other video about the Supreme Court ruling and on voter registration.
News now, the Supreme Court is allowing Virginia to purge suspected non-citizen voter registrations. This is a big decision from the Supreme Court, just came in moments ago. I want to go straight to CNN's Paula Reed. Paula, what can you tell us?
Jim, this is incredibly significant because this is one of the court's first significant decisions ahead of next week's election. Here, they are allowing the state of Virginia to continue with a program that will purge suspected non-citizens from its voter registration rolls. Now, this is a bit of a surprise because the trial court and the appellate court sided with the Biden administration that objected to this purge, saying that the state cannot, under federal law, remove large groups of people from the voter rolls within 90 days of an election, though there is nothing.
They're siding with the Republicans now because they realize that they not siding with them back during the last election was a mistake. And why is it okay for non-citizens to be registered to vote in our elections? It makes no sense.
Stopping them from investigating individual voters and removing them from the voter rolls. Now, former President Trump has seized on this issue in Virginia, as have other Republicans, as a way that they should be able to remove suspected non-citizens, calling it sort of a common sense move. And here,
absolutely a common sense move, because again, why are non-citizens registering to vote in our elections? Elections should be fair, right? Okay.
A divided court, a court divided across partisan lines, siding with Republicans. Now, Governor Youngkin, who is implementing or attempting to implement this program, he has issued a statement saying, quote, "This is a victory for common sense and election fairness."
Absolutely.
And Paula, the former president is already stoking fears of voter fraud in Pennsylvania. But what are officials actually saying? Because we hear Trump out on the campaign trail said that there's already voter fraud happening in Pennsylvania. But what can you tell us?
That's exactly right. Well, here are the facts, Jim. Last week in Lancaster County, law enforcement officials announced they had identified what they described as incidents of suspected voter registration fraud. And this was according to a bipartisan board of elections and the county's district attorney. They said that this likely stemmed from large-scale canvassing operations that submitted registration applications with duplicate handwriting and inaccurate or unverifiable addresses. The officials said likely about 2,500 voter registration forms had been sort of put aside.
Now, this is 2,500 voter registration forms in Pennsylvania. Everybody, look, Pennsylvania, we know that in elections, Pennsylvania is one of the biggest electorals. So every vote counts in Pennsylvania. And then you have 2,500, not 25, 2,500 voter registration forms that's been found some kind of inaccuracies on them. Listen, too big to rig, right? And it's already been rigged. It's not fair. It's not okay. Our elections need to be fair again.
And segregated to be reviewed and investigated. But they have not said how many examples of actual fraud that they have found. They also said that they suspected 2 other counties could have received potentially fraudulent applications. But here, the former president getting out ahead of the facts, suggesting that there has indeed been fraud. Of course, Pennsylvania is one of the most sought after prizes in the Electoral College, which is why we've seen the Trump team, the RNC, filing many legal challenges already in that state, laying the groundwork to challenge a potential outcome that doesn't go their way in a court of law. But here you see him also sowing seeds of doubt in the court of public opinion. Now, Governor Josh Shapiro spoke to CNN about these efforts last night. Let's take a listen to what he said.
I understand that Donald Trump wants to again, use the same playbook where he tries to, create chaos and stoke division and fear about our system. But again, we will have a free and fair, safe and secure election in Pennsylvania, and the will of the people will.
Why are they attacking Trump for actually defending himself? He is the Republican candidate that's running for president. There are several signs. There are that's registration, election interference. There's several signs of this. So how is he getting ahead of the facts when he's actually speaking on the facts? There are cases. There's 2,500 voter registration inaccuracies over in Lancaster County and 2 other counties. So make that make sense to me. And this is on CNN, so they just hate Trump anyway.
Will be respected and protected.
It should be. Thank you.
And Jim, we will continue to cover that investigation and bring our viewers any developments if this investigation does yield evidence of actual fraud.
CNN Chief Supreme Court Analyst Joan Voskupic joins me now. Joan, this is remarkable on a couple of levels. One,
there are so many signs. There's so many cases out there right now. You got people throwing away ballots. The mailmans are throwing away ballots, getting arrested. You got people burning ballot boxes. There's ample amount of evidence suggesting that they don't want this election to be fair. It is not fair, and no matter how hard they try, I still, in my heart, don't believe that the election is fair. All right, so feds, U.S. postal workers arrested for throwing away mail, including election ballots. So there's something there. A United States mailman is accused of tossing away more than 1,000 pieces of mail, including 400 pieces of political mail and one election ballot, according to the newly filed court document. Hundreds of damaged ballots saved following fire at Dropbox in Washington. Hundreds of damaged ballots. So that's what? That election interference? Is it? I think that's some form of interference in our election, right? Fair, free elections. But you got people burning ballots, Come on. Make that make sense. So, yeah, I got out and voted today, early voting. Elections in a couple of days. I encourage everybody who still has some time to get out there and do it early, go ahead and do it, because on the 5th, I'm sure it's going to be insane. And I want to be at home just watching the election. So I got out there early and did it. At one point, I was against the early voting, but it's the same. And I feel like if I get it out there now, I'll have a better chance of actually casting my vote. And I did. But until next time, if you enjoyed the content here, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, like the content. It helps me out, helps the channel grow. And if you want to drop anything in the comment, who you feel, do you think there's election fraud going on, or do you think there's election interference going on. Let me know down in the comment sections below. What's your mindset? How do you feel? Until next time.